man, I saw it's like in the 60s there.
We got a cold snap, buddy. It's it was like not last night, the night before, it got down to like 45.
Wow.
And I was like, wow, it's very it's unseasonably cool right now.
I'm jealous, man. It's going to be 109 here on Saturday.
What?
Yes.
What part of Oregon are you in?
Portland.
It's going to be 109 in Portland, Oregon?
That's what they're forecasting, yes.
Oh my gosh. I mean, so to me, based on my limited knowledge, that seems like way out of character.
It is, especially this early in the year.
Oh my gosh. I just thought because you're closer to the coast, and kind of north, it'd be cooler, but.
Nope.
Oh my gosh.
Well,
okay. We need to mix up the weather from your state and my state then.
Yes.
Well, one thing that's interesting is it would be interesting to see if these heat snaps have an effect on harvests, right? Because that's notorious for these farmers, right? Is there's one bad event and then, there's a monkey wrench into things.
Yeah. I have to start doing, you're an economics guy, Keegan, in, what do they call it? Futures trading or something like that, where for different agricultural type products.
Well, it may be soon with cannabis where they're doing futures on yields. So yields in production and yields in processing. Oh.
Never know. You never know.
So, well, I see Heather's joined us again today. So essentially, Charles has done some diligent work parsing data this past week. And I've put together a user interface. And so now there's just a little bit of business logic left, and we'll have a rudimentary laboratory information management system put together.
Well, congratulations, guys. That's cool.
Exactly. So, there's still a few pieces to fill in, but yeah, it's coming together well. So if you want, I could just show you at some point today just what's together. And then, maybe mostly of a talking day today because I've mostly been in the weeds with that. But I'm curious, have any of you had any data adventures this past week?
Heather kind of grimaced there for a second.
Observed data. I'll be an observer today.
Okay. So I did a little bit of work this week on my graduate project. Unfortunately, most of it's been writing. So my introduction, everything for my paper, but I was able in Google Cloud in their AI platform to feed in my first set of data into the market basket analysis algorithm. I haven't really looked at the results much. I was just trying to get the code to work properly. So probably by next week, I think I will have some basic results to share if we wanted to, as far as some association rules that come out of the retail transactions at some dispensaries. So I might have something rudimentary to share next week.
Okay, and so these are just sort of associations between purchases that you may not be readily apparent on first glance.
Yeah, so there's going to be association rules on two different levels. The first level will be on association rules between the different product categories. So there's 8 product categories in the Washington data set. And then the other association rules will be actually down at the product level to see if any interesting relationships pop up there as far as, complementary products being bought together. That one's going to be more challenging because the data set that needs to fill in or to feed the algorithm is very, very sparse, but it should be able to be handled in the AI platform in Google Cloud. But that one's going to be a little harder to tease some intel out of it, just because some of the measures for these association rules become pretty diluted. But we'll see. That's part of this whole process, is it kind of exploring this data. So we'll see what pops out. But to begin with, it's just going to be looking at the categories of the different products to see how those relate. So yeah.
So of course, I think the category is going to be promising. The sample name is going to be all over the board, so that may be difficult.
Yeah.
Do you have any data points on like total price, like the total amount, like per receipt, or the number of items by chance?
I mean, that information's in the raw data, but for the market basket analysis, it's I'm just incorporating the product categories at the moment. That particular modeling, not that I'm aware of that. I mean, you may be able to incorporate pricing in some capacity, but I haven't really, if that's what you're thinking of, I haven't really considered that angle yet.
Well, what I'm trying to get at is basically, in general, like there's maybe like low quality and high quality cannabis. How you differentiate the two, maybe it's just sort of arbitrary, so it may not be the best.
Well, keep thinking along those lines, because this is just a starting point, and if it gives us a springboard into looking at some different angles, that would be useful. One of the things that I had sent some information to you, I think it was last week, and Charles and Heather, just to kind of fill you in. To do this type of analysis, typically you do it in retail stores, and you're looking for, I gave the analogy before, but if I buy peanut butter at my grocery store, then I might be also likely to buy bread and jam. And that's kind of what this algorithm does, is it shows you those relationships. But I wanted to look at some representative dispensaries to get kind of have them treat them like flagship dispensaries, that they might be representative of the industry. And Keegan helped me out a little bit last week with some good questions and some advice on looking at dispensaries by median income of their zip codes, because he had noticed previously that sometimes there might be a relationship between median income and kind of the product base at a certain dispensary and how much they're selling and things like that. So I use that median income as a way of trying to differentiate some of the dispensaries, and that was helpful. So I'm using that as kind of my basis for picking. In my project, I said I'm picking 3 dispensaries, but I'll probably actually look at more dispensaries and look at the association patterns of more than just 3. But that analysis kind of helps. So thanks for that, Keegan, just kind of recommending to go down that path and look at those. So that's kind of where I am right now. Like I said, I hope to have something to share next week, some rudimentary stuff. But Keegan, I know that we're meeting Friday.
Yes.
Here in Detroit. So, but I may have something to show you on Friday as well. But we'll see. Awesome. I do need to bring you up a little bit to speed on some of the more of the details of the project, but I don't want to.
That's cool. And just so everyone knows, so we're attending CannaCon in Detroit on Friday, which it should be big, and it's exciting. And so I'll get to learn a lot about the Michigan market, which I don't know much about. So
yeah, it's gonna be fun.
And then basically I just started to think about, okay, so what makes like the dispensaries look different, right? And so I'm sure you've seen them. So there's, sometimes you have the classier, the nicer looking dispensaries. Then they'll maybe be like in a prime real estate. Like, so for example, in Portland, I'm sure in downtown Portland, there's like some pretty nice dispensaries. And then,
No, man, they keep all that stuff out of downtown.
yes.
All,
And so,
anything that can be perceived as seedy, they move out to the neighborhoods. But yeah, there are well, they're sort of like the bigger chains now, right? There are places, that have like 4 or 5. I think there's some places that have like 10 locations, right? And they have nicer stores. And then they're like, the smaller sort of like mom and pop places where they only have like one location. And so, yeah, the chains are kind of like in nicer neighborhoods, and the stores are really nice and clean looking, um, and yeah, I don't know about. Yeah, I don't really know that there's a big difference in pricing. I mean, um,
what about just product, like the products they stock? Like, do they all stock the same products, or does the store, the chains stock different products?
I don't know. I'm not like a
Well,
huge
exactly.
connoisseur of these things.
And that's why we'll have to look at the data, right? Because it would just be anecdotal evidence. So we'll have to kind of parse this out.
But I know that they're billboards around town, like one chain, like they're the exclusive carrier of, Tommy Chong brand. And somebody's the exclusive carrier of Snoop Dogg's brand. And
it's interesting that you're talking about this, Charles. You remember I-75 here in Detroit. That's the main north-south highway that passes right by Detroit and goes north. Well, I had to drive down I-75 yesterday to get to the airport to pick up my mom, and I had to go through Detroit. And to your point about these billboards, almost all the billboards on I-75 are all cannabis billboards now. And it's been about 4 or 5 months since I've been down that highway. It is amazing how much it's changed, the billboards in that period of time. It's either cannabis dispensary billboards or lawyer billboards. So to your point, yeah, about just the advertising and everything, I noticed it as well here.
I think that could be an interesting study. I don't know how you'd get the data, but because people are always trying to find out, does advertising pay off? Like, what's the return on investment for advertising? So if you could think of a way to measure that, be an incredibly interesting question to answer.
Yeah. I did have a chart, and Keegan, I sent this chart to you via email last week, but I've added some additional information to it, or pointed out some different information within this chart. And if maybe later on in the conversation we can talk about it as a group, because I would just be curious of what people thought about the data that I had in this chart. It's essentially median income versus the 2020 dispensary annual sales. And you see some interesting relationships that emerge out of that chart. But anyway, it's something that if anybody's interested in looking at, maybe we can talk about it later.
You could share your screen if you want, and we can talk about the chart real quick. So
Okay.
I don't see why not.
Okay, let me share a window here 1 second. Let me know if you can see this.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So on the bottom axis here, the x-axis, we've got median income by zip code. All right. So this is an anomaly here, but basically median income, and it increases, and you get something median income up to over $140,000 up here. And on the left-hand side, you see annual sales from dispensaries. So some of the top selling dispensaries are up here around was it 14 million? Am I reading that correctly? Yeah, $14 million annual 2020 sales. So, and this is per your suggestion, Keegan, and thank you again for recommending I look at this. So what we see is that the really high selling dispensaries tend to, well, you've got a smattering of them. It goes down a little bit here, but the main high selling dispensaries here kind of fall on the middle of the median income curve, or maybe not the middle, but kind of lower section here. But I get a representation of the higher selling dispensaries across the median incomes by zip code. Okay, so for my project, I'm going to pick dispensaries that are in this oval, so I can get like a good representation across median income. But what I think is interesting is some of these other areas. So this big block here on the lower left-hand side, that's where the vast majority of the operators are, right? The vast majority of the dispensaries operate in this lower median income area, and they have lower sales. All right, so this may be the mom and pop quadrant, or whatever we call it. Here we have lower annual sales, but in higher median income areas. So also mom and pop, but in more wealthier areas. And then you get the ones that are just more successful regardless of median income, and they just sell more, right? They kind of bubble up here. And you got this kind of transitional area where I've got the little triangle. And these are folks that are just seem to be making their way up the annual sales range. And then you get a few outliers. So on the lower right-hand corner here, you see these guys are, again, probably mom and pop shops, but in high income areas. What I thought was really interesting, and I don't know if you can see this, and I probably am obscuring it a little bit, but in median income, you kind of get this division right going up here. So you see high income and lower income, and it seems to be like this kind of somewhat of a gap in between. I just thought, I mean, it's kind of an artifact of the data, but I thought that was kind of interesting that, median income, I mean, I'm not saying haves and have-nots. It's not that, differentiating, but it's kind of
curious.
Yeah, it is curious. It just seems like that's, it's just the way that the cookie crumbled here. And we see a kind of two main groupings of median income. But yeah, it was just interesting to go through this exercise. And, what I would like to see over time would be interesting is how much of these dispensaries, as they mature, move upwards, right? Maybe they move upwards, or how many of these dots disappear. Is there going to be consolidation? And in the consolidation, I'm sure would probably push some of these dispensaries to be more profitable as they get bought by other companies, maybe. I don't know, just kind of thinking out loud. It was a fun exercise to do this. Obviously, it brings up more questions than answers, but
I think these are helpful groupings, like how you identified the big cluster at the bottom. And I think you're right, where those are people who are basically, they can get property where they can find it. Maybe they don't have the best location. They may not be paying that much for rent, and they have low sales. It looks like similar people in those same neighborhoods, like you said, are breaking out. And so that could even be, those may even be chains in the lower income neighborhoods where they've just got, maybe they were able to get a slightly better location.
Sure. This right here, so see my oval?
Mm-hmm.
So the actual dispensaries that are in that oval are the records that are in this kind of yellow color. So the top grossing dispensary was this one in Wenatchee, if I'm saying that properly. They're called Craft Cannabis in Wenatchee. Then you've got Main Street Marijuana in Vancouver. But you can see these kind of top tier. When I say top tier, they're the highest producing across the median scale. But
So here, what I noticed right off the bat is, so look, you've got Main Street marijuana, and then you've got Main Street marijuana east.
So they've been around a long time. They were one of the first dispensaries in the area because Vancouver is just across the Columbia River from Portland.
Okay.
So
So they're well established.
yeah, and yeah, that's
So I would almost add a classifier to those as like 0 or 1, and I would give them a 1 for chain. And so it's going to be tough to identify these, but if you have a clever way, maybe if they each include their names, because you can kind of identify these as like the brand is Main Street Marijuana, and they've got 2 locations.
Yeah, that would be a good differentiator between those. It would just really be cool to monitor this over time, just to see how the market's starting to mature or develop.
And then the question is, why do they break away? So I met somebody from Zips Cannabis, and they're a pretty big, well-established dispensary in Tacoma, and it could just be one of those things is once you start getting your market dominance, then you're able to grow, and it's hard for other people to get a foothold. Like everybody knows you've got a customer base. So like, what is it? Do they just have a really well-placed location? That's a possibility.
Yeah. I mean, and you were mentioning also about doing some regression in this to kind of tease out those some of those drivers behind this. That's not part of my graduate project, but it would be fun just to do that, just to kind of start teasing out some of these variables. And this kind of work, to know what the drivers behind market growth and development, I mean, this is stuff that you're probably familiar with, Keegan, but that kind of information is going to be very useful for market consolidators, these kind of people with big pockets that are going to go into this world and look to pull the market together. I'm sure that they would be very interested in that kind of information.
Exactly. It's just, how do you measure it? And so,
Yeah.
And this is sort of a wild idea, but at one point I listened to an economics seminar, and they were talking, it was a health one. They were talking about, it's not good for your health to live to a certain proximity to a road. And I think they were somehow measuring the width of the roads, whether that was lanes or highways or something. So I wonder if there's any way to sort of, given the location of the dispensary, to know, like, okay, what number of lanes road is that on? Like, is it on a 2-lane road? Is that on a 4-lane road? Because basically what I'm trying to parse out is, I've got a sneaking suspicion that some of these are just well placed, and then that gives them the opportunity for growth. So they're just like for example, the Green Lady in Olympia. They've got Green Lady East and Green Lady West. They're both almost outside of city limits, because I don't know if you're really allowed to have something in like downtown Olympia. And so they basically just have one on each side of Olympia. So it's they literally have the Olympia market cornered. So
No, that makes a lot of sense, and I'm sure that lots of retail companies have probably gone down this path many, many times with this kind of analysis, right? I mean, how do you choose the right location for a store? I'm sure that's probably well documented approach to doing this kind of stuff. It might be just worthwhile to see what already exists in the literature, to see what we could snag and use, right, for that kind of analysis. A lot of this space, I mean, the work that you're doing in the lab world is probably much more nuanced and unique, but this retail stuff has been done many times over, just in different markets.
Well, it's a hot area of interest. So
Yeah.
at one point, someone who does a bunch of data analytics told me some like 4 big areas, and one of the biggest areas is just the consumer. So what's driving the consumer? A lot of people are just guessing, but like I said, people are starting to uncover it. But I think it's all interrelated. So
Yeah. So my current job here at General Motors, I'm starting a new position in July 15th. And I'm going over to the customer experience team. So I'm going to be doing a lot of work in this space, from as far as customer analytics and consumer behavior and that type of thing. So, what I'm learning there, I'm sure could be applicable. Well, what I'll be doing there, some of it can be applicable to this space as well. So yeah, should be interesting.
So one thing that I've noticed, I think a lot of these places, they're places that compete on price, right? Because when you're driving to the grocery store, every other block there's a sign spinner, $3 grams, $1 grams, they're more sign spinners than billboards. But yeah, so there's that. And then I also, I talked to someone and they were saying, a big driver now is, like the higher THC, which is probably not the low price stuff. I don't know. Again, I'm not like, this is not something I study a whole lot, but I mean, I think that's kind of like I think there's 2 sort of markets, right? There's the people who are price sensitive, and the people that want, their Thunderbird of marijuana.
That's a great analogy. Yeah, well, I mean, to that point in this oval here, I think because of the median income distribution, I think it's going to be interesting to see what kind of association rules we get with, let's say this point here and this point over here, the different kind of product associations that might come out of this, right? Are they more of the upscale market that you're talking about, or is this more the Thunderbird market over here? I don't know, but yeah, we'll definitely get a chance to look at it.
Hey, I had a question on your data. So, just from the basics, are unemployment benefits included as a source of income in this data?
I don't know. That's a good question. This median income data came from the government census website, and I'm not exactly sure how they calculated the median income, but that's a good question, and I'm glad you asked it because I should have a sense of how that data was developed.
It's not common sense because, I mean, I browse Reddit a lot. So just speaking to your point about THC, I mean, unemployment and even just Medicaid benefits are something that can just allow somebody to still use cannabis as a method of treatment for their pain or whatever. But high percent THC, at least in the state that I live, is not necessarily the most expensively priced of cannabis flowers, that is. So, but yeah, anyway, so unemployment can make that happen. I just don't know if 40,000 is even achievable on unemployment benefits in that area, but it could be almost achievable here because of our special circumstances.
Yeah, that's interesting. And Heather, you're in Colorado, right?
I'm in Maryland.
Oh my gosh, I was not even close. I thought for some reason you're in Colorado, so you're in Maryland. Okay.
That's okay. Yeah, I mean, so percent percent wise, I mean, I can get like usually the higher percent THC I can get from a particular carrier, and that's usually the cheapest, believe it or not. But yeah, we have way overpriced stuff for no reason, like 18%, 22% THC. Come on, $65 for an eighth, please.
Yeah, you're going to get the hustling, right? That's just going to be people trying to maximize their profits. That's going to happen regardless.
That's interesting to hear about the price points though in Maryland. I'll look to see if there's any Maryland data, because that's just, I mean, it's anecdotal, but it sounds like quite different than what's going on in Washington or Oregon or California. So, yeah,
it's a good observation. That's why it's important, to have these types of meetings, because especially in this market, right, and in different states and how it's evolving differently, it really is interesting to get those perspectives.
well, it's wild because I mean, what other good is? Well, I'm sure there's others, but there's like different state markets, and there's some overlap. Like, so maybe like an equipment producer in Colorado will sell to people all over the country, but there's a lot of little medium-sized businesses all over, and the different regulations obviously have an effect on the market outcome. So I'm interested to see, okay, how many suppliers, how many producers are there in Maryland? Because that could be an interesting data point. So that's a reason that a lot of people were attracted to Oklahoma. It's the highest number of cultivators per capita.
Wow.
So all like the equipment producers, like all the equipment manufacturers, we're all interested in serving the Oklahoma market, because you've got I think there's 7,000 licensees. I forget if those are all cultivation, but there's thousands of cultivation licenses. So they all need soil, fertilizer, pots. So
Right.
accountants, you name it. So so there's a lot of demand for services.
Yeah, that's.
I was gonna say that's hard to believe. I mean, I feel like either Southern Oregon or Northern California must have the most producers.
Well, what my hypothesis is let's take California, for example. I bet you it's hard to get a foothold there, because you're going to be competing with people who are well established and may have incredibly large operations. So, and they're probably competitive. So, it's going to be tough to set up shop there. But other places, it may be easier to enter. And then what I'm also interested to see is, okay, like what's the persistent rate? So, just because there's a lot of licenses now in Oklahoma, it may balance out in a couple of years. So, it may reach an equilibrium. So we'll see.
So Heather, in Maryland, what's the status? Is it just medical marijuana that's legal, or is it?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's completely political as far as I can see. That is, so we have these, we have a number of licenses that can be distributed, and some of the those with the heavier pockets are still doing, trying to enforce higher prices, and it's just silly. But anyway, so yeah, medical only. I'm a medical card holder, so
Okay.
people just the generals. I mean, I don't want to say general, but I would say the majority view, at least on Maryland Reddit for cannabis, is that they want legalization so that they don't have College Park cops tasing people just because they have cannabis on them, where they vape. That still is happening. But looking from the business standpoint, they don't want to disturb anything because their favorite dispensary is doing fine, or their host of strains that they use is consistent, and they just don't want to rock the boat. So it's a double-edged sword over here. So I don't think legalization is going to happen, even though we had Virginia. Can you imagine Virginia legal? Like they're looking to. I thought that was like on like happening right now. I'm like, okay, so we're never going to do that. Never.
I get a feeling that as people from Maryland might start crossing state lines to go get better deals. It'll even out eventually. I don't think they can hold on to that control for as long as they would like.
Yeah. I mean, I wish, but go ahead, please.
It just shows you, market forces, right? Because like you said, people just go to Virginia, then Maryland's going to realize they're missing out on some tax revenue, and then they may change some things at that point.
Yeah.
Well, incredibly interesting. So, well, should we take 10 minutes or so and just look at the laboratory information management system so far?
Be great. I'm excited.
All right. So just keep in mind that we're still working on a bit of the functionality, but let me get this spun up real quick, and then I'll just give it a quick demo. Oh, I'll just go ahead and share my screen, and we'll just get this spun up. So, get signed into a mock account real quick. Just create an account.
Your graphics are very professional. I like them.
Oh yeah, just I think art's important, so wanted to incorporate a little. Okay. So first things first, we'll just get this account just set up with an organization real quick. And so everybody can just use it for free, and then if they need integration with the state traceability system, then we can help them out with that. So really, I'll just sort of run you through the the main data points here that the laboratory collects. So everything really evolves around your analyses. So this is where you're going to you're basically just going to do so you're essentially, going to have your cannabinoid analysis, and you'll add analytes. So analytes are the compounds that you test in your analysis. So, for example, you may have, THC. There's not going to be a limit to that. The LOD is the lowest order of detection that the lab can actually detect. So, for example, it may just be 0.01%. That's just going to be anything that they measure that's lower than 0.01%. They're going to report as non-detected, because the way science works is you're always trying to disprove a negative. So you can prove that there's something there, but you can never disprove a negative. So it's always got to be non-detected. You can't firmly, you can't 100% say that there's no THC whatsoever, but you didn't detect any. The LOQ is the lowest order of quantification. So this is what they can actually quantify. So this you would expect to be slightly above your LOD. So anything above the LOQ, they can report to the client. So they can just put that on their certificate, and that's the official measurement. If it's between the LOQ and the LOD, it's technically an estimate. So they have detected something, but they can't quantify it. So different laboratories will approach this differently. Some will report it as a non-detect, others will report it as an estimate. Here in Oklahoma, I believe they actually have it regulated that they have to put it on their certificate as less than the LOQ. The analytes, and then just a couple formalities. You'll have areas where you keep things and your contacts to keep track of your clients that you test for. Then, of course, you need scientific instruments. And so these are what are going to be doing the analysis. And so what's critical is they'll be spitting out data to a certain place in your network. So typically, you'll specify your data path. So there'll typically be a path to your instrument's data, and then this will be collected intermittently to stock up your measurements. So, there's just a few things here. For example, people will need to keep the instrument maintained and calibrated. Instrument is technically a piece of inventory, but of course, labs have many pieces of inventory, so we need to keep those well managed. But back to the instruments. So you've got your instruments performing your analyses, and your instruments generate measurements. So your measurements will be for a specific sample, and they'll be for a specific analyte. So this will be your measurement for THC, and what's going to happen is the instrument will measure your THC. It may measure it in 600 parts per million. You've weighed out, let's say half of gram of cannabis, and you've now diluted it by a certain factor, the standard method is a dilution factor of 10. So you've now done your analyst measurement and you've recorded your instrument measurement. You now apply the Analytes formula to get your final results. So your results will be your, so that, I may need to add a label here, but your result will be your 20% for your THC, or maybe your 0.3% if you're growing hemp. You've got your results, and then these are all for your samples. And so basically the final piece that's needed is to generate a certificate for these results. So that's the final piece of business logic that I need to finish. And so basically what you'll do when you click create certificate is it will then get the sample data points. So that will get your sample name, your sample ID. It will get the contact information, so that way you can put your contact's address, city, and information on their certificate. And then it may even grab some project variables. So a project is a group of samples sent in at a specific time by the client. And so then this may have a transfer ID. So, for example, in Oklahoma, all samples need to be recorded. So whenever a client sends you a transfer, there will be transfer data. And so this will just be the organization that it's coming from, as well as information about the transporter. So these are all the data points that the laboratory works with. So that I've basically just put together a simple, what they call a CRUD in the software world, which is create, read, update, and delete. So now a lab could create, read, update, and delete data for all of these data points. So it's not a complete LIMS. Like I said, there's still a lot of business logic that needs to be written. For example, the next thing that really needs to be tackled is a COA generation mechanism. But we're well on our way to having something functional that labs can use. And there's traceability support, so that way if a client's integrated with Metric, they can see their packages, their lab tests, their locations, transfers, and settings. I've written the logic for, say, processors and producers and potentially retailers to also use the platform, primarily just to send samples in for testing. That functionality got put on the back burner because at the moment I'm just trying to finish everything needed for the for the labs.
That's nice work.
Oh, thanks, Paul. Just kind of putting it together bit by bit. So that way it's primarily targeted towards laboratories that are operating in states that are using Metric. Ideally, or do you have a question?
Well, looking at from the perspective of an outsider going through this, and I'm sure you guys have probably already thought about this, but there's obviously quite a lot of effort that lab techs will have to do to make the data entry stuff on here. Have you thought about kind of like creating menus that are pre-populated templates they can use over and over again?
Excellent question and good suggestion. So, have thought about doing essentially what we call worksheets. So, having exactly templates or worksheets where, say, a client or say an analyst creates a project. Ideally, like you said, some of these things can be pre-populated, and perhaps you could even print off a form, whether that's you actually print it off or whether it's just a digital form. So that way, yeah, analysts can use worksheets, because a lot of laboratories are already familiar with using worksheets. A lot of analysts are familiar with using worksheets. So it is a worthwhile mechanism to collect data. And so I think it is worthwhile to include some sort of worksheet creation, some sort of worksheet generation tool that can also feed data back into the system.
That's really cool. Yeah, good work, guys.
Yes. And I want to give a shout out to Charles, who's really done the heavy lifting to actually write the routines that parse the instrument data. So when you're building out a project like this, there's what I consider it 3 different aspects. So in the software world, they might call it model view controller, whatever you want to call it. Basically, I call it, there's your user interface, then you've got your business logic, and then you need something to glue them together. And then I call that the API. So the user interface is coming together. Like I said, there still needs to be some interesting features here to create certificates. But that shouldn't be too hard to do. The business logic is, a lot of it is getting written. So here, Analytics is a Python module, and there's a LIMS module in there. And this is where Charles has begun to write the business logic for collecting results from instruments. So for example, we're collecting results from Agilent BCs, from to do residual solvents and terpenes. And Charles has written a routine to import heavy metals. And so, just to show you, what we're actually parsing here, we can look at some of the test data. Well, I'm not sure. But this is sort of a typical data file that would be but this is a typical data file that would be generated by an Agilent instrument. So for legacy's sake, things don't change much. So between the different years and different versions, this is generally what you would expect. And that's not a bad thing. So maybe they designed their data files that way, so that way scientists can continue to collect these with the data collection routines that they may have written a long time ago. And in the laboratory, it's important to not break things that are working, especially if they're being used, in production to do analysis. So, long story short, the data files have not changed much over the years. And so sheet 1, you generally just have some of the sample identifiers. This is where you really get your sample name. And then you have many tabs here that are related to, your actual instrument.
Just curious, I mean, how many instruments and their associated data files do you think you'll have to accommodate?
Well, we're trying to do 6 off of the bat. So that would, let me get this right. So that would be residual solvents, terpenes, cannabinoids, pesticides, heavy metals, and mycotoxins. So you can screen for mycotoxins through the LCMS. The pesticides are also through the LCMS. So those data collection routines are similar, but they have different compounds. And so here, I'll show you the similarity here. So this is a data file for residual solvents. So if you look here on the compound sheet, you'll see the name, and I've just put in fictitious amounts, but these names, these names are your analytes. So propane. If you look at the terpene data, you'll see that the workbook is quite similar. In fact, it's laid out the exact same, except on the compound sheet, we now have different compounds. So we now have terpenes. So when we import these in, importing in terpenes and residual solvents, the logic is the same. We just have to control for the analyte names. So we just have to match the analyte names up appropriately. Some of the data files aren't quite the same. So as Charles found out, the heavy metals looks quite different than the rest. And then the pesticides and mycotoxins will also look different than the rest. And we are tentatively going to add a 7th, which would be importing microbials. So that would be when you screen for microbial contaminants, you do it through qPCR, and qPCR can generate a data file. I've never parsed one of these before, but essentially it's just an Excel file, and we're basically going to need to read this in, apply a good bit of logic, especially to the micro, and then get this data stored. So to answer your question, we're starting off with a handful, and we're sort of going to add more as laboratories demand them. But we figured, we could start with the high demand instruments. And so I would like to add some Shimazdu instruments. I've met a couple contacts from Shimazdu at CannaCon, so I'm trying to work that out. We've got some adjuvant examples. So depending on the model of someone's adjuvant HPLC or adjuvant GC, we can import their data. Thanks to Charles's diligent work, writing the data collection functions. So now is really just time for really the glue plus a little bit of automation. So we've got the user interface finished. The business logic, Charles has finished a good chunk. I still need to write a little bit to create certificates, but that's on the agenda. And then we'll essentially leverage an API. And so all this API does is facilitates use of the business logic, either through the user interface or potentially programmatically if somebody wanted to, make requests to the Canlytics API. So I've learned a principle, sort of the API design. And so really I just broke this whole project up into, okay, what are the data models that people need to keep track of? And so then each data model is essentially an API endpoint. And I don't think this one's implemented yet. But basically, it's just going to allow people to get, update, or create and delete data. And so you can now interface with, well, once I've finished the API, you'll be able to interface with all of these data models. Each one will have more than a handful of data points. And then we can also leverage all of the business logic. And so it's almost a fully functional LIMS at that point. Well, I don't think it's fully functional at that point, but then the cherry on top is you can add a little bit of automation. So that way you can say you can write a script that will use the Canlytics module, collect data from your instrument, and upload the data through the API, and then you can look at it in your user interface. So it's got all the pieces to be an incredible system. Just needs a couple finishing touches. And so this coming week, I will be touching up the API, and hopefully it'll be fully functional, by the next time we speak. So
Very cool.
last week, we promised to get the instrument parsing done. That was done thanks almost solely to Charles, because I've been just trying to get this user interface up. But I just can't thank Charles enough, because now we can read in the data, and next week we can get this thing generating certificates.
That's pretty cool. So this will be offered as a web service?
Exactly. So I originally was building it out as a desktop app, and then I realized that really the only desktop functionality you need is to collect data from the instruments. So eventually I figured, okay, why not just make it into like a web app, and then just have a small little either script. I'm going to start off with a script, but I may like to have just almost a tiny little standalone desktop app that all it does is collect results from your scientific instruments.
Sure, that could be a good offering. So one of the things that occurred to me while you're talking through this is if it's a web service. So the angle of privacy, right? So different labs that buy your product, they're probably going to want to, insurances for privacy and their own data and that sort of thing. So I imagine you've probably done a little bit thinking about that. But I know at General Motors with the OnStar app where we track vehicle telemetry, the customer has to opt in for that. And all the data we collect is anonymous, right? We can't tell who owns the vehicle or any of that kind of stuff. So we respect all their privacy. But at the same time, we get to aggregate that data and use it for other things to help customers out. So, it's just something to think about for this service, right? I mean, there's going to be tons of value in aggregated data behind the scenes, but it probably would have to be anonymized in some way.
You hit on an interesting point here obviously labs, they want to keep everything private. And so, of course, we respect everybody's data with our privacy policy. However, if a lab wants to set up their very own Cannalytics implementation, so that way they can leverage all of the functionality of Cannalytics, and they have oversight over their own database, then essentially, so Cannalytics is open source, and I've written quite detailed instructions here on how you can get Cannalytics up and running, essentially in looking for the, so you can get Cannalytics up and running in a Docker container.
Okay.
So anywhere you can run a Docker container, you can run Cannalytics.
Very
So
cool.
I'm running it just in the cloud, just to offer it as a web service to anyone in the world. And more is, so it's the Cannalytics platform, and it's almost an example of, yes, so this can be done. We're doing it. You can use ours if you would like. And if labs have the know-how, and a lot do, because a lot do have technical staff, a lot are building out their own LIMS. So we've provided this so that labs can spin this up, and then they can serve it from they could either serve it from their own cloud instance, they could serve it from an on-site server, you name it, it can be done. And so basically we're providing something for everybody. So, the labs that want to do it themselves, we're providing, the infrastructure for them to do that, and the guide. And if they need a little support, we can provide some support.
Very cool.
And then for the people who need just the cookie cutter solution, they just need something that works out of the box, then we're, hosting our own implementation at console.cannalytics.com. That way, you don't have to have a technical staff to get off the ground.
Mm-hmm.
You can get started in 5 minutes. You can collect all your data. Then you can either import your data, or say you're ready to go, you're ready to start your own implementation. You can export all of your data, import it into your new implementation, and then you're off to the races. So
that's great. So you can onboard smaller outfits, and as they grow, you can accommodate their growth.
Exactly. And so we're sort of leaving, the door open for some new additions. So for example, I have planned but have not yet implemented an invoicing endpoint. That way you can keep track of your invoices for your projects and your samples. That way you can send invoices to your clients. I thought that one was not mission critical, so I pulled that one for the time being, but that one can easily be added into the future. And so as Analytics starts working with more and more laboratories, hopefully we can find out what each laboratory's unique needs are, so that way we can start improving the platform, adding more and more features, adding more and more data points, and making testing as simple and easy as possible.
Definitely, you can see you guys put a lot of thought into this. It's pretty neat. Do you have any what they call a mean viable product, right? Do you have anybody that's kind of testing this for you yet, or getting feedback on it?
Yes. So we're working with a laboratory here in Tulsa, essentially just doing early stage feedback, just finding out, okay, what data points do you need? What's your ideal workflow? So we're trying to get the minimal viable product out. And really the last step, well, there's two last steps that are needed. One, Charles has written the logic to parse the instrument data. Now I just need to write a script to automatically upload those measurements. So that way, people don't have to sit here and tediously type in measurements. Those are just going to be flowing automatically from the instrument. And then the other final piece is actually generating the certificate. So the certificate of analysis is the product that laboratories are selling, essentially. They're in the service industry, right? They're providing the analysis service. How do you know the analysis was done? You get a certificate of analysis. So ultimately, the certificate is what signifies that everything's been done, and the certificate needs all of the data points on there, and it needs to be generated in a simple and easy way and delivered to the client. So we've approached this as we just need to collect all of the data points as simply and easily as possible. And so now I'll, in the coming week, be writing a Coa Generation Routine. And I'll put this in the Analytics module. And basically what that's going to do is it's just going to take a template, whether that's a Word, an Excel, probably start with those two. So just in a Word or an Excel template, and use like Jenga style. So Jenga would just say, project ID goes in between like two squiggly lines, two curly brackets. So we'll do some Jenga style templates and then actually generate a certificate. So that would be your PDF saying that the analysis was done. And so that is the final step in to do our our minimal viable product. Because so once you can take all of the data points, you can collect your measurements, and then you can generate your certificate, then you've done the laboratory test from start to finish. You've received your transfer, created your project, created your samples, added your analyses, tested for all the analytes, collected the measurements, and then you issue your COA, and then that will just be essentially a URL where your client, it'll be a private, secure URL that only they will know. And so then they can get their certificate, and that's what they're looking for. So that's what the producers and processors need, because they need that certificate to be able to wholesale their products to the retailers. So that's what it's all about, is generating this certificate. So we're almost there. And like I said, I would have loved to have this finished today, but Rome wasn't built in a day, so we're going to have to keep tinkering on this through this next week.
It always takes longer than you think.
True.
Well, congratulations. I don't know who else you've shown this to, but it's really, really cool. It's and even from somebody who doesn't really know about the lab world, just looking at your navigation bar on the left-hand side, and where you just kind of walk through that, it's almost self-documenting what it does, right? I mean, I don't know what an analyte is, but I can see the process, right? So that's cool from a user's perspective. Of course, these are going to be lab people, and they're going to know some of these things already, but it's just neat that it's kind of almost self-documenting the process.
Exactly, because I mean, that's the whole philosophy here at Cannalytics, is we think that cannabis testing should be simple and easy. There's no need for it to be complicated. It's just, you're just doing analyses. You know, you're going to have to take some measurements and record these, but, you know, it doesn't have to be complicated. So we put in a lot of thought about, okay, what are all the data models you need? What are the key data points? And we've put together something that we hope is simple for people to use. But now we need to get people using it, or in this laboratory more, so that way we can, just keep improving. So it's come a long way, but hopefully we're providing value to laboratories.
Awesome.
So, but let's go ahead and start wrapping up here, because I see that we've gone quite a bit over. But thank you for your enthusiasm, because it's exciting. It's been a long time coming, but I think we're finally close to a solution that laboratories will get an enormous amount of value out of.
Yeah, it's cool to see something. You've talked about it briefly before. I know Charles has been working on you with it, but it's nice to see the idea take form, and something that you can share. And I know you guys must be pretty proud of that. I have an appreciation for the amount of work that it took to pull that together. So good job on that.
Exactly, and it's just one of those things. We just keep working at it piece by piece, and so we just have a clear vision, and we just always know what the next step is. And so, for example, this past week it was parsing that data, and Charles played an instrumental role, pun intended. And so, it's coming together. So, and we're just going to keep at it and keep trying to help people. But
I'm gonna have to. I'm gonna have to drop off here in a second.
Yeah.
But I sorry to cut you off there, Keegan. But I will reach out to you probably Thursday-ish evening, just to firm up things for Friday morning.
Yes.
And I have to go back. Go ahead.
Oh no.
I bought the tickets to CannaCon for me and my brother-in-law, who will be coming. You'll meet him as well. And I think I only bought it. Is there like, there's like speakers, right? There's the convention floor, and then there's like these break-off speaking events as well.
Yes. And so if you can, I would recommend getting I guess they call them seminars. So they're a bit extra. So they are the more expensive ticket, but I would recommend that at least for Friday. So typically, like the seminars first thing on Friday are the best.
Okay, I do I'll be out of state till probably about 1:30, and then I'll have to leave at that point. But we're gonna get there as early as we possibly can.
Oh yes, and like I said, it's not critical. And in fact, I think they may record them, and I'll have notes and may record if they let me. And so it's not critical. But I just like to, people usually present their latest research or ideas. So I think it's a good way to keep your ear to the ground.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Okay, well, I do have to drop.
Yes.
So it was good talking to everybody.
We stayed way late today, so thank everybody for coming, and I hope you learned a bit. And next week we'll touch base and maybe get back into the data, since that's been neglected a little bit.
All right. Well, when you're in Detroit, man, get some pizza. Really good
Detroit.
pizza. The best pizza.
Well, if Keegan can break away at lunchtime, my brother and I, we're going to take him somewhere good to eat. So maybe we'll end up
Awesome.
being a Chicago style, slap you in the face, Detroit style pizza.
Yeah, I mean, West Coast pizza is horrible. You really
Yeah.
haven't had pizza until you've had pizza in Detroit.
Well, I think it'll be worth worth having fun with some pizza. So,
All right.
but well, it was awesome. And then until next week, stay productive, everybody.
Okay.
Good talking to everybody. Take care.
Thank you. Bye now.
Bye.